It's the Liars Club Oddcast, a weekly conversation filled with insights, tips, and secrets from the myriad of creative people who make stuff up for a living. Stay tuned and you could hear from New York Times bestselling authors, National Book Award finalists, debut novelists, screenwriters, musicians, composers, cartoonists, actors, stand-up comedians, line tamers, and all manner of creators who burn the midnight oil and sometimes their dinner. Whether you're a reader or a fellow writer, join us as we plumb the depths of the creative process for inspiration, semi-plausible stories, and a few laughs. So grab a libation, sit back, and spend some quality time with the creative folks who make stuff up for a living in a lively conversation with the Liars Club. Right, so here we are, ladies and gentlemen, once again at the Liars Club Oddcast. And we are in our wee boxes, zooming away, and our wee boxes. And we are hitting our third shot.
I'm trying to get out. No, it's stuck.
Dear Lord. Here we go. Down there. We're switching from talking about mid-book crisis to miming. Miming coming from the crushing your head. So the third in our series of Summer Writers Block Party, we are looking at mid-book crisis. And so why are we talking about, well, first of all, what the hell is a mid-book crisis, and why are we talking about it?
I think, if sometimes you're working on a book and you're halfway through, and then you come down, one day and start working on it, and you see that your manuscript has bought a red sports car.
Yeah, that's true.
You know there's trouble.
You know it's trouble. Yeah, it's true.
So here's what I think a mid-book crisis is this, that you get 100 or so pages into the book, and by that point you've already started to have notions of changes that you want to make in the 100 pages that you've written, but the rest of the book, the next 200 pages of it, don't exist at all, except hypothetically in your head, and you look there and there's nothing. It's like this fog, this amorphous nothing ahead of you, and you lose your nerve. And I think that's the mid-book crisis, is you don't know where to go next. You're afraid of where to go next. You're afraid of stepping in the wrong place.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot at stake because you've already put a lot of time in. 100. It's not like you've written 5 pages. 100 pages is a lot of pages. So it's a pretty scary place.
It's about trust. It's about trusting your idea to having faith in the project that you're working on. And sometimes when you get to the mid-book, you realize, ooh, and sometimes you're wrong.
And sometimes you're right.
Yeah.
That's why it's so hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. That's very hard. Although, well, it's an interesting thing because, if you got 100, for example, Kelly, if you were, I could ask all of you guys, do any of you have manuscripts that are 100 pages in that you dropped completely?
No.
I have.
Yeah, I have some that I want to get back to, but usually it's because another project, kind of comes up that someone wants.
No, I've walked away, not at 100, but maybe at 50. Maybe at 50. I usually know after a few chapters. Yep.
Well, it's interesting you talk about 50 pages. Have you walked away at 100 pages?
No, I don't walk away.
Okay.
Oh, so I'm the commitment phobe.
I study and I reshape and I morph and I, add to the recipe or totally kill it in a different way, but I reshape it. But I don't want to.
Or sometimes the manuscript dumps you, and it's like, look, John, it's not you, it's me.
Yeah, right. Kelly, I was going to say that 50 pages, though, that's about the same amount that the Scottish mystery writer Val McDermott says she writes just to find out if the thing has legs. So there are obviously a lot of projects she abandons at 50 pages where you go, nah. Which is actually a good place to lead us into our actual roundtable, because I actually believe you used that. You mentioned that when we did the roundtable, I thought about that. Yeah. You did, and I thought about that when Kelly said it. The 50 pages is sort of an interesting idea. So let's listen on then to what we have to say, because in the roundtable, because we do talk about different approaches and different ways to think about this mid-book crisis reality.
Ooh, I hope we're smart.
Well,
I doubt that, but
we're mildly smart. All right, so here we go. off to the crisis. Where else should we go?
Here we go.
Yeah.
All right, so here we go. So we are We are once again back with the Liars Club Oddcast, and as we've done once before now, I think, we started out with writer's block, which Kelly told us didn't exist, and we're now doing our roundtable conversation. Can't remember anymore.
No.
But we're continuing on with that conversation. The five of us are around the table here talking about various things around writing and the writing life and the challenge of writing, because as Mary I think as either Mary or Kelly or both of them pointed out last time. No, I'm not. I'm making this shit up. It shows. I'm making this shit up. That's what I do.
Let's start again.
Yeah, you want to start again?
Yeah.
You want to start again?
Yeah,
Start again.
Yeah.
Okay. Here's the opening. Hey, we're at the Liars Club here, the Liars Club Oddcast. Take it away, John.
Oh, baby.
We are having another roundtable, a follow-up of last month's roundtable on writer's block. We've gotten some questions in response to that, and a couple of people have asked us.
I've got questions in response to it.
About something that a lot of people refer to as mid-book block.
Mid-book crisis.
Or mid-book crisis. And some
Yeah.
people have like a textbook mid-book crisis.
That's true. Yeah, but
which is
during semester break.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we thought we would do another roundtable about it and just kind of talk it out and see if we can come up with some solutions for the people out there who are having it.
Sure.
The mushy middle.
The mushy middle, yeah.
How to diet.
Yeah, that's right. This is particularly apropos around the holidays. So Kelly, I think you actually
he
first.
says mushy middle and then looks at me. Okay.
That's right. Mushy middle, Kelly.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, baby.
Mushy.
Yes, I did say that I had a belief system around.
A belief system.
Yes, around
She does. She
what-
sacrifices a goat at the middle of her book. At the midpoint.
That's one way to deal with it. But I think I'm a veteran of having been through a lot of mushy middles. And I think that was that was a hallmark of my early unpublished work.
That's when you let the food cook too long, you get emotional.
Correct. Well, that's one of the problems. And I think that a mushy middle is a failure of premise. Because I think that if you have the right premise with the right characters, that there's enough there to take you through the middle, that there's enough inherent conflict in that initial paragraph describing your book that should take you through the middle and possibly to the end. So it's some people would say it's a failure to outline, but I think that if your premise isn't strong, you can't outline anyway.
So I was going to say, you think that's more of a structural thing then?
Oh, I think it is a structural thing.
Oh, okay.
Yes, it's a concept thing.
Well, you say failure of premise. That means if you're having a problem with the middle of your book, then your premise is flawed, and you need to just have it complete do-over.
Yes, you should just light it on fire. No,
because last time you said there was no such thing as writer's block, and it's like, we're trying to be helpful here.
No, I'm not suggesting that you have to. You have to start over, but you might have to retool your premise to allow more conflict.
I beg your pardon? Retool your premise?
Retool your premise. It
Okay.
sounds sexy.
It
but
does.
It's not.
It does.
Very sexy.
I
A lot
know.
sexier than a mushy middle.
It's
I
not
know.
Louis C.K.'s.
Let's see if we can give you an
premise.
example.
No.
Okay. So let's say you want to write a story about sisters who go to the same college accidentally. I mean, I don't know. I'm making this
What?
up. I know, crazy. All right. So you find the middle. You have a strong beginning. There's like an accident that lands them at the same college or something, and then you're lost in the middle without a lot of plot. Mm-hmm. I think that if you take those sisters and you say, well, they're twins, or they're opposites, or they're in love with the same guy, like if you add to the premise some fact about the sisters, it will give you more to take you through to the middle. So that's the kind of thing.
Okay,
I'm talking about.
so what you're talking about, though, with that is starting off with an idea that actually is not sufficient to support the structure of a
Right.
novel.
That is what I'm saying.
Right.
So
You
you're
need
saying
to
that the middle crisis happens if you don't have enough. And
Correct.
I agree with that, except I think sometimes you're, I think that's one reason that can happen.
Yes.
It's not the only one.
No,
It's not the
agreed,
only
agreed.
one. The thing is, sometimes you want to go back to what Sue Miller said, that initial argument between two characters, and what is your book's conflict, and where is it going? Another
where
thing,
does that
though,
argument
is
take
sometimes, and you mentioned outlining, and I think outlining is a great way to avoid reaching a slump in the middle, because you have a backup plan for your story arc.
You just have to be careful when you're writing your outline. Don't say slump.
Slump.
Right
Slump
here.
here.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
No,
right.
but if you don't enjoy writing from an outline, your work could still be mushy in the middle because you're not having fun.
Let me finish.
Okay,
No,
you
sorry.
finish.
So I'm going to finish.
Yeah,
So,
damn
Finish
it.
it. Take it, Mary.
Yeah. What was I going to say?
Yes.
Speaking of mushy metal.
Sometimes
In
what
prison-
might help is a subplot.
Yeah.
Which
Well, again,
gives you a
yes.
whole nother story arc
Yes.
to enrich and build and
Right.
weave into and out of.
Well,
and
I'm sorry, go
okay,
ahead.
sorry. One more thing I want to say. I'm reading some books.
Oh, good. It's
Thank
good
you.
that you're reading
Thank
some
you.
books. We're really,
Thank you.
yeah, we're thrilled.
The cat in the hat.
And a book that I'm reading now is really pissing me off because the whole middle is talking. They're talking instead of they have lots of action at the beginning and lots of events happening, and you're sucked in, and then all the characters do is talk about what they know and what they think and
Yeah,
what they're finding
that's
out.
mush. That's
And
mush.
it really is a very bad trap to fall into, I think, in the
It's
middle.
a very dangerous thing to have your characters tell each other things that they sort of already know because
the reader knows.
you're doing it for the reader.
And they're
To-
figuring out,
Yes.
but instead of going and showing the reader, they're just figuring it out together, discussing.
So
it.
lack
So-
of
so-
action.
Lack
Lack of
of-
action
lack
is
of-
a problem.
So I think structurally, I think if you outline, which I do, and for me, I think it really helps avoid these
John.
kinds of things.
Go, John.
One of the things in that is common structure in thrillers is that you kind of get 2/3 or 3/4 of the way through the book, and then kind of the goal is it changes. It's like you think you're headed towards this
Right.
one thing,
A
you
redirect.
find out you're actually headed towards this other thing. It makes it a lot easier to kind of have rising action in the middle and then pivot to other rising action. So you kind of have you have peaks and valleys and pacing. When you outline, it's really easy to do that. It's easy to kind of bake that in. It's one of the reasons that I do it. But a lot of writers do kind of feel that they don't enjoy the process of writing if it's not this kind of voyage of discovery as
right.
they're writing.
That's how I am.
So I think that one of the pitfalls of that process is this kind of thing. You say, okay, well, I've got these characters, and they are fully formed. I know them. I'm putting them in this situation. I'm going to see where it takes me.
Right.
And sometimes where it takes you is them sitting in a room talking for 50 or 60 pages,
Which is
And
wrong.
So
Right, yeah.
so short of saying, well, you can outline and fix it that way. How do people whose writing process does not involve outlines avoid that?
I think you need to have the subplot baked into your premise. I mean, I think that the tension and a strong subplot needs to be in that opening paragraph for sure. If you're not going to outline, you need to at least have that anchor so you have natural tension.
But even if you outline, I also think you can reach a point where when you're outlining the book before you've written the book, you're saying, okay, at this point in the book, when I get to this is where the two characters wake up and they've been dressed up as ballerinas and they have no idea what they're doing, but they're on stage and they've got to perform.
I love that.
Sounded good at the time when you were writing that, but as you've actually written the book and you figured out who these characters are and you've maybe figured out a more involved situation, that you discover that
made a
this
mistake.
doesn't actually work.
Yes.
This is not where the story is going.
Sounds the waking up lady ballerina costume
Ken-
sounds a little like an actor's nightmare.
Yeah, I think that is an actor's
you
nightmare.
can't always tell that from the outline,
No.
though, until you're deeper in.
Yeah.
Well,
Another thing I find, writers who take a short story and adapt it into a novel, I think that is the most tricky time for the mushy middle, because you've inherently got a shorter middle,
Right.
and then you find yourself with this really long middle, and you have the beginning and the end. So I'm not going to say don't do that, but I think that you need to take extra care when you are doing that to add in subplots and outline action for sure.
So I have a question. I'm listening to the conversation here, and a lot of it's focused on plot, it's on structure, on premise, on subplot, all that kind of thing. Are there other factors, though, that play into it? And we talked about writer's block before, and writer's block, what we discussed was, a lot of other things that were psychological. The bells, the tintinnabulation of the bells. We're having a very Poe-like experience here.
We got a question from a caller.
So how was Neil?
Wow, the operators just lit up right now.
I don't know.
Operators are standing by, unfortunately.
I think that there are. I think
What
that
was his question?
He wonders if there's other factors other than structure that lead to the mushy middle, like writer's block, like being bored in the middle of your own writing.
Well, or like just losing your nerve at that
There you
point.
go.
You've written
Yeah.
150 pages.
You're tired.
My friend Maureen McHugh calls this the dark night of despair. It's like you've written 150 pages and it's rough draft, and you look back at that and it's kind of crappy.
Yeah, it's sucking in
And
the rearview mirror.
it sucks in the rearview mirror, but you look ahead and there's nothing there at all.
Right.
And that's the point where a lot of people kind of give up because they don't know what comes next. They don't know what
A lot
to
of
do
people just
after
realize that it sucks to be a writer.
That it sucks to be a writer.
So
Yeah, well,
don't
that's true
look
too.
back. Would that be a piece
Well,
of
if you
advice?
see nothing
No.
ahead, what good is it not to look back? I mean,
If
it
you
doesn't
look
matter.
back and you make yourself crazy.
But if you
No,
see nothing ahead, what do you? I'm
Well,
sorry.
that's why you want an outline.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
you
one
need-
reason you. That's one reason you
And I
want
will
to
say,
outline.
so one of the things that I know
You've got something ahead, even
Some
though you wake
people
up in a
hate to
ballerina's
outline.
outfit.
a lot of
Some
a lot
people
of
hate
a
to
lot of
outline.
writers that I know who don't outline say, "Oh, well, I know
Where I'm
I know
going.
where I know the beginning and I know the end.
Yep.
And I just need to get there." And I think that if you're having problems with the mushy middle, then maybe instead of just knowing where the beginning and the end, know the middle ahead of time. Don't just say, "Oh, I have to get from A to B."
You
Figure
need A,
you have to
B,
get
and
to
C.
A to C through B. And at least have that third idea, that
Yeah.
third kind of positioning.
the whole
I'm not
idea
even
of
sure it's
outlining
A to
is
C. I think it's like A to H or A to J.
but see, that's the thing. Stopping off
partition
points. An outline doesn't have to be as detailed as
No,
John and I
no.
do it.
Yeah, it could be anything.
just
Right,
plot
right,
points.
right.
That's what
that
I
you
do.
know
I do a
you're go-
list. I do
Yeah.
a list, and that keeps me from being overwhelmed. But I would never start writing without that list. And every time I have started writing without that list and without a complete premise, I've gotten into trouble for sure. If not in the middle, in the end.
I think one thing for writers who do outline, who come up against this problem, one of the things that one of the kind of knocks against outlining is that people feel constrained by it, and it's really important to keep in mind that the outline is a tool and it works for you, not the other way around.
Right.
And I think that there is some writers, you kind of get to a point in a work and the outline isn't working anymore, and you find yourself contorting
invalid.
yourself and trying to make it work when it doesn't, and you can just stop and
Right.
change the outline.
Right.
Stop
It's
and
not a
rethink it.
rule.
Take a break, figure out what's not working, figure out what different directions you're going to go in. I mean, I will go and change the outline instead of just diverging from it. But yeah, I mean, you can do that however many times you want.
Well,
I
there's
have. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say also, there's just the fact that you can give yourself permission to write a whole lot of crap to try and figure out where you're supposed to go from the point where you're stuck too. And I think some people
Prefer that?
I think some people are afraid of writing the garbage. Because that's not getting me from here to there. That's just kind of
Well, they think it's
figuring this
wasting
stuff out.
time, and it's frustrating
Yeah,
to
and
spend
it's-
your time
it's
writing garbage.
Not
Well, the
necessarily
middle's a
wasting
scary
time.
place to
Yeah.
try things because it could lead you to a different ending. So I think that frightens people to get experimental and to go off the plot in the
But you
middle.
always
But you
have your
should
original
try.
idea to come
Yes,
back to.
Yes.
Well, if you get experimental in the middle of the book, you're going to end up having to turn around too and apply that to what you've written up
yes,
until
and
now. So
change
it's
and
going to
possibly change your ending.
other stuff
so.
as well. Yeah, sure.
But change is not a bad thing.
I've never
That's
written
the-
a book yet where I've stuck to the outline.
There you go.
Nor have I.
I use it as a fallback, and then things change as you go along. The characters evolve. The situation takes turns and twists.
It's like
it's
when
not,
we-
it's
when
not
we-
the rule of law.
no, when we talked to Karen Fowler, however many months ago, she said that she doesn't outline until after she's written a story, and then she uses the outline as a means of checking that she got everything in that she needed to. So
I wonder too if, in terms of process, if you think of our own processes, it's not that middle ground area when you're doing that mid-book crisis or whatever, is not trusting your own process. I mean, when you say, I don't want to write crap, so I'm not going to use it as a bridge, and that's a waste of time, it's like, well, but if that's part of your process, then it's not a waste of time, it's your process.
Right.
So if you understand your process, then you know what's going on.
But if it's leading in a direction that you don't want to go, why spend the time going there if you know that it's extraneous?
I mean,
it's part of your process.
And the tricky part is...
When in doubt, it's just part of your process.
That's good.
I mean, part of the challenge...
choice.
Part of the challenge is knowing what is sucking and what is just being a sucky first draft. What can be fixed in revision and rewrite, and what's just bad and a mistake.
But again, it's also like, this isn't where I thought I was supposed to be by the time I got here.
Right. Well, and you have your gut. Your gut is telling you,
But there are some general things that we can say should be shied away from, like all the pages of people talking in the coffee shop in the middle, right? Instead of acting. I mean, there are other things like
even
that.
talking in the car.
Talking in the car at the beginning. Talking in the car ever, unless it's a one-act play, it does deaden. It does deaden a lot of action. Yeah, I don't know why, especially in the car.
Yeah, it's like Donald Moss in that workbook for writing the breakout novel. I think he's the one responsible for this. Says that you cannot write. He does not allow you. He disallows any scenes where people are sitting and having tea or coffee.
Exactly.
Because that's what happens is they regurgitate the plot up till now to each other. And the tension in your story just plummets.
Yep. I mean, I've read scenes that were razor's edge, pins and needles, incredibly dynamic, and it's just two people having a cup of tea and talking.
Yeah. But what if it's whiskey? Can they have whiskey?
I think it's the same problem.
You know what it is? I think it's really hard to do. I think it's really hard to do a scene that's amazing with two people having a drink in a car.
And the way is
the tension has to build. The tension has to build, and so if you can do the tension and the conflict, then you can do the scene.
Difference,
so
I think, is
you
put poison in one of the cups.
Well, people shouldn't talk. Unless there's tension.
Approach that scene with the idea of, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to make this just absolutely kick ass.
It's going to be the best tea scene ever.
It's going to be the best tea scene anyone's ever written.
Yes. Arsenic and old lace.
Yes.
I mean, you could imagine a bridge game. What could be more boring than a bridge game? And one of the big rules of bridge is to always return your partner's lead. And if you have a guy across the table from you who says, always return the lead, always return your partner's lead, and you keep screwing that up, and then suddenly the guy brings out a loaded .45, puts it on the table and says, return your fucking partner's lead.
There's a play. There's a play called The Bridge Game, isn't there? I saw something in a small, like a community theater, that was very tense, and it was all about playing cards. But
you can make enemies playing bridge.
I feel like tension is one of the biggest problems with the flow of a book in any section. And some people are very, very bad at adding tension in certain genres.
Right.
In certain genres, it's automatic. It's you've got it plotted out, and what you're building towards, and there's a crime which is inherently tense. But in non-crime fiction, I think it's harder for some people to get right.
Another way to approach this whole idea, though, of having two people just sitting and talking, is to add a third person to that situation.
Or a cat is always good.
Well, a cat's good, but you have two people in a scene together. They can pretty much get along. Okay, they'll find some common ground where they're not in conflict with each other. But if you put a third person in there, that person's going to side with one of them or the other, and it always keeps the thing off center.
It's like three people being
triangles
friends.
are inherently
triangles are inherently tense.
I don't think that the solution for a middle that is two people talking is to add a third person. I think in the middle of your book,
could if they're dead on the floor.
You want to get away from just talky.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so what we were talking about, for example, is using plot points that you've outlined or identified, whatever name you want to call it, or adding a subplot that has its own twists and plot points, or, for example, what's another way of avoiding that dull
Well, it
Mike?
depends on the nature of the novel you're writing, though.
Right.
There isn't any one solution to this because you're talking about 5,000 different kinds of stories.
Right, but these
or
are
approaches to
ideas,
writing
for
stories.
example.
So, just the idea of having a second story, whether it's a subplot or not, that doesn't seem like it's necessarily doing anything in the first part of the book, and then suddenly it kind of veers and rams into what you think was your main plot.
I think a new character or a new setting sometimes helps the middle also, you know.
Moving them somewhere.
Someone new comes to town.
Was it Robert Parker? Somebody, some famous crime writer, said, whenever something's bogging down, there's a knock at the door, and someone shoots, the guy with a gun standing outside, and he shoots somebody. He kind of throws that in there.
No, the knock at the door. The knock at the door. There can always be
I don't answer the door all the time.
A knock at the door.
I mean, I think with writers who kind of are, their process is kind of exploratory, where they sit down and they kind of want to see where things going. One of the other pitfalls of that I think really can contribute to this is that when you start at the beginning, anything's possible. And in the process of writing your story, in the process of writing the beginning of your story, you are closing off all these different avenues.
Yes, right.
You're committing yourself. Every choice, exactly. Yeah. Which I think kind of goes back to the writer's block question, because I think sometimes, knowing that on some level, and knowing that each decision that you're making is closing a door can really kind of hamstring your progress, can really kind of leave you flat-footed and terrified to commit.
And you may have closed the door on something that you actually find you need now that you're 200 pages in.
Can't begin. Yeah, right. That's why people can't begin, because they know they're committing to some path.
So I wonder if one of the possible fixes to a problem like this is to take a break and look at what you've written and think about what you could change in the beginning that you've written that would allow you to make the middle, the middle that you wanted to be.
So that's really a good idea.
Yes, and that's
an excellent idea.
But then you might have the dark night of the soul where you think everything sucks. So you
every night.
Everybody goes through that sooner or later.
Different kinds of people, shouldn't maybe reread and should forge ahead. And other kinds of people would benefit from looking back and being brave enough to change.
Well, I think even if you look back, you should forge ahead. Take a lot of notes, write stuff in a journal if you want. But
what I do now, and this has become kind of an essential part of my process, is as I'm working, and right now I'm under deadline and forging ahead, and as I have ideas about changes to the beginning of the book, I don't stop writing. I just put a little bracket, make little notes, and leave it there, you know? And then the first thing I do when I finish the first draft is I count my brackets, then I cry, and then I start going through them and making the changes that I've left
myself
to do.
I do something very similar.
Me too. I do something like that too.
I think that's a very good idea, because you lose that momentum.
You don't.
And you're toast.
Yep.
Right.
You're absolutely toast. It's like I was on a panel at PhilCon, the science fiction convention here, talking strangely enough about writer's block, and one of the people on the panel was Samuel R. Delaney, who just out of the blue piped up and said, if I can get this right, that writing is an addiction that is easily destroyed, essentially, or the desire to write is easily overcome. So you really kind of have to do everything in your power not to screw with that, not to mess it up.
To nurture it.
Yeah, to nurture it.
So what I'm hearing a lot of in terms of all of your conversation here is, and we're going back to the process, more of a process question. You all discovered your processes to get through this slump in the middle, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm hearing a different thing. How did you discover it? How did you know? How did you find it out? I mean, the fact of the matter is, people,
I was unpublished. I mean, I could get agents and I could get, meetings, but no one was buying my work. So I think it was very clear for me that I had a problem.
But you didn't know it was a mushy middle.
I didn't. Well, and I don't know that it really was. I had problems beyond the mushy middle, but I think that was the core problem, was that I had very strong beginnings
and
compared to the rest of the material.
It.
Yes.
So, So I honestly don't think I ever identified a middle as a problem, because I outline and because I always have a subplot. So I always, if I felt like I was at a
standstill,
I would just be able to work it through through thinking. I mean, through thinking the plot and the characters, I never really got stuck. But I also think that sometimes you need to relax the tension.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I would get, because I was writing thrillers and suspense, I would get too tense, and I would have to add
some softness,
some downtime. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Some tea time.
Yes.
Yes.
Would you like a cup?
And so I don't think I ever really. This isn't a problem that I ever really struggled with, and I think because I outline. I didn't. No.
So the 2 minute Oddcast is just fucking outline.
Well,
okay? Just outline.
Well, but that's not to say.
No, that's the Jon McGoran 2 minute out.
So that's not. So I didn't struggle with it while writing the draft.
Right.
I struggled with it while writing the outline. So it's like when I'm figuring out what the plot's going to be. I mean, sometimes you get lost in the middle, but it's a lot easier to I know I keep hitting the same point, but it's a lot easier to diagnose the problem and fix it. And it's a lot less painful when you're just doing it to an outline than to a 400-page novel.
So I would say for a writer who's a structuralist, such as you, then that outline is absolutely critical. For somebody who's kind of in the middle between structuralist and somebody who just wants organically to find out where the story goes, et cetera, if you get to the point where your outline is no longer valid, then be flexible enough to throw that outline out and create a new one.
Oh, absolutely.
And change that direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Maybe we should just not call it an outline. I mean, I think that some people that don't want to outline don't like
timeline,
the word.
outline,
the
list, structure, whatever, however you do it.
The roadmap,
the bones,
the
skeleton.
Everybody's got some bones, even if they carry it in their head.
Yeah.
And
I think so it's that crucial third. So it's like if you've got a beginning and an end, you need a middle.
Right.
And if before you start writing the draft, your beginning and your end,
or a pre-end,
take a minute, and figure out like that one way station in the middle that you're going to go through, and I think that would help a lot.
So is it safe to say though that a middle can't just be a connector between the beginning and the end?
No.
Like that has to do other things.
Yeah,
so what else does a middle do? Because I think that might be where writers get stuck.
Oh, it's a good question.
Yeah, because if you write the end, your ending, your beginning, and you're just thinking, how do I get from here to there?
One thing to think about, or one way to look at the middle is in terms of reversals.
Yes.
So you know what your beginning is, you know where you're going to arrive. It's often useful to figure out where in the middle of the book things are going to switch.
Yep, a twist
okay,
or a flip.
a twist or a flip, where the power dynamic will flip, where the person will be at the worst possible situation they could possibly be in. Because you've already plotted it out. You've already plotted the ending and you've plotted the beginning, so you know they're going to survive, or you know how it's going to turn out. But if you can find a way to turn their world 180 degrees in the middle,
that's what the middle's for.
So, and I think if all you have is a beginning and an end, then one way to think about it is that maybe your end isn't your end.
Yeah.
And that there's another end.
Your end might be the middle.
And your end is the middle,
Yes.
and part of it will be that reversal, that change of course,
Right.
that revelation of what is really at stake, what's really going on, what the goal is or whatever. And I think that in ways that's easier if you've already written the beginning of the book, because if you put a middle in between the beginning that you already know about and the end that you are shooting for, then really that beginning still has to be going towards the middle.
Exactly.
So it's a lot easier to if you're already headed towards one direction, it's easier to change things after that.
And then you also have the danger of actors do this all the time, where you get a scene, you learn the lines, but you're actually playing emotionally. You're playing the end of the scene, like you're anticipating the end of the scene. So you can't.
You're
do
being
that.
manipulated into a situation that doesn't come naturally.
Right. Well, but there are a lot of similarities. A reversal part of what makes a reversal work is kind of building it up as though it's a climax, as though it's a conclusion, as though it's exactly. So if if the characters are shooting at this, they're aiming for this one thing, and then when they get there, they find out it's something else.
Right.
It makes perfect sense that they would be shooting for that for the beginning of the book. They're not going to know there's this other thing until they find out there's this other thing.
It's useful sometimes to look at story structure in terms of reversals too. I mean, you can take a fairy tale like Cinderella and go through it, and that's all that is. It's like everything that comes up, she's blocked, and then it's reversed by something like a fairy godmother shows up, and So first, there's an announcement where everybody's invited. All the women in the kingdom are invited to the ball, except her stepmother and her stepsisters turn around and say, but you can't go. So there's a reversal. It's like everybody's invited, but you're not. Mm-hmm. So she's stuck. Everybody else gets to go to the ball. But then either the spirit of her mother or a fairy godmother, depending on the version of the story, shows up and makes it possible for her to go to the ball. But there's a catch to that, which is you got to leave the ball at midnight. So everything reverses the situation over and over again all the way through that fairy tale. It's a really good structure.
It's kind of a good structure.
Yeah.
Because
you don't like Cinderella, but it's kind of a good structure.
And here's what I don't like about Cinderella.
Okay.
Right? Here's what I don't like about Cinderella.
Okay.
So the whole thing, so she has to rush back.
Right.
So her slipper falls off.
Right.
And so
Don't you hate that?
The prince is going around the kingdom trying to find out whose foot fits this slipper perfectly.
Yes.
Right? Obviously,
whose foot this flipper sits.
Obviously, it doesn't fit perfectly. It fell off. It fell off.
It's flawed.
It's flawed. It's a flawed premise.
You need to think about writing that version of Cinderella. You really do.
So now we're into fairy tales. Let me jump to one other thing. One of the questions that's been striking me as I've listened to you guys talk.
Is what's wrong with all of you? Yes, I know.
Other than that,
yes,
which I still haven't figured out.
Yeah.
The question I would have is now, how does the sort of classic, because you were talking about reversals and that kind of thing, so the classic 5-act structure, the classic 3 or 5-act structure, which of course always ends up with, if it's a tragedy towards the end of the thing or the 4th act, it looks like they're going to make it and then they don't. Or the other way around, it's a comedy, it looks like they're not going to make it and they do.
Right.
So does that help us in any way, shape, or form?
Yes,
it's kind of a reversal.
That's kind of what we're talking
the
about.
5-act structure. I mean, does that help us? Is that
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
So, and 5-act structure is a 5-step outline. I mean, it's like if you
there's that word again.
There's that word again. But still, it's like if you have these kind of anchor points, and like here's hitting one, and here's getting from one to the other. You've got this is where you're starting, this is where you're going to end. There's going to be 2 or 3 other places you're going to go, and ways that you're going to get from one to the other. Then you've got a story in mind.
Mm-hmm. Well, look at this, the Scottish play. I mean, that's a good example because you've got essentially the 5-act structure there. Absolutely. The midpoint of the 5-act structure is effectively Macbeth gets what he wanted, what everyone's promised him he's going to get, and then the second half of that, leading away from that, is all of that's undone. Right. All of it comes apart.
It all depends where you want to end.
It all turns to shite, exactly.
Where you end your story.
Yeah.
If you end your story after Act 3, then you have a whole different deal. But if it keeps on going on,
that's a really
life does keep going on.
But you know what? Listening to you guys, it makes me realize that everybody says if you want to write a novel, the beginning should be you put your main characters up a tree and throw shit at them, right? So there needs to be, conflict inherently in the beginning. But what we're talking about is conflict for the character throughout.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So shit continues to go wrong for the character that they can, and that I think that's true no matter what genre.
But it's life,
and I think
because it's about life.
And I think writers frequently treat their characters too nicely.
Yes.
And they make things too easy for their characters. Right. And what you really want to do is make it as hard as possible.
Well,
Donald Moss, right? Make it worse.
Yeah, make it worse.
Someone
Absolutely
said you avoid on the page what you avoid in life. So if you don't like to argue, or you don't like to fight, or you don't like to, cry, you'll avoid that emotionality or whatever on the page. Not to get too.
But I don't think
Freudian
the
about
fifth, the 5-act thing is
Did she
really.
Talk about my mother?
Yes.
I don't really think the 5-act thing is followed religiously anymore because you can end you can make a comic tragedy and a tragedy comic. I mean, your ending
Yes.
doesn't have to resolve the way it would.
It was
Right,
more of a,
But it's just-
because if you go back to classical, every blah, 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 the five
Yeah,
act
yeah,
structure
yeah.
is so burned
Yeah.
into us.
3 acts,
but there's
5 acts,
twists
5 acts.
anymore that make everything upside down.
Right.
I mean, if you talk to a bunch of writers who've been rejected recently by editors or by agents, one of the words that comes up all the time is, where's the hook? Where's the twist? So I think that those things, particularly the twist, refers to the middle. The hook is the beginning, right? The hook is the premise in the beginning, and then the twist is referring to the middle, and that's why people are getting rejected. And you get so sick of hearing those words from these poor people who are in tears, but that's really what they're talking
The
about.
twist can come at the end.
Yes, but a lot of
Frequently it happens in the second
emanates-
chapter and it messes
emanates-
everything up.
Well, it emanates from a
Wait.
rough. If you
Yeah.
don't have it, it's usually lacking and obvious
Yes.
in the middle.
Yes. Right.
So anyway,
So I think we've
Exhausted.
I think we've
this.
exhausted. Although I do think that perhaps there's a conversation around conflict or something.
Yeah,
coming
I'm
in
sure there is.
because
Tension,
that's an interesting
conflict.
point.
Yes.
Shut up.
we could
That's-
fight
leave me
choreograph
alone.
that. Yeah.
So those are some good, good ideas on how to avoid the mushy middle.
Yep.
Unless you
I learned
are having a
something.
different kind of mushy middle.
And unfortunately, what happens after the middle is the end, and we're out of time for today.
Exactly.
Well, there you go.
Speaking
There
of
you are.
ends.
Yeah.
So
Boy, we
was
got through that.
smooth,
a lot.
John.
smooth, just smooth,
Yeah,
man.
smooth.
Yeah, smooth.
Well-
That's the beer.
So I think then what we need to do is ask. I think we should be asking for other questions or other topics for these
Sure.
roundtables.
Yeah, yep.
Of interest
Of interest, yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So
from our listeners?
from our listeners, you're out there. We know you're out
Are
there.
you
You're
sure
out there.
this is a good idea?
They could send their suggestions to our Gmail account.
That's right. That's lcoddcast@gmail.com.
Cool. I'm going to send some fake questions just to.
Absolutely, because we expect
Test
that.
questions.
And we know the snarky questions will be from John.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the off-color ones will be from Kelly.
Yes.
So you want to repeat that address again in your
And that's
do-
what
Your radio
your professional voice.
lcoddcast@gmail.com. Just email your questions at lcoddcast@gmail.com. That's lcoddcast@gmail.com.
Whoa, smooth.
There we go.
Thanks. That was
Thanks.
fun.
Yeah, I think that was.
Yeah.
The end.
Mystery, suspense, action, adventure? What are you in the mood for? We have that. A Glint of Mischief is a weekly podcast where we read the first chapter of an indie published book. So sit back and let us help you find your next favorite book. Stop by glintofmischief.com to see what all we have done, or check us out on iTunes or Google Play to just dive in and enjoy. Until next time, see you around.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.